Hello and welcome to another Light Reading podcast, a video and audio edition. I'm live at OFC. This is Phil Harvey. I'm an editor at Light Reading, and I'm joined today by Andrew Schmitt, who is the directing analyst and all other things.
That's right. Yeah, wear a lot of hats when you're running a small company.
Yes, it's Cignal AI.
That's correct.
And just so everybody gets it right, it's Cignal AI, and the address
.ai.
and the web address is cignal.ai.
That's right. Yeah,
Okay.
and we focus primarily on market research for the telecom, datacom, equipment, and component sector.
And in the datacom bit is what sort of captured my attention the last couple of, I'm usually covering the telecom side, but of course anymore it's converging. All of these companies are partnering together, and they're all kind of trying to solve the same problem, which is finding the bandwidth bottlenecks and eliminating them with speed and efficiency. And a lot of those bottlenecks are, of course, in the data center. Is that market been particularly hot and heavy lately, or am I just waking up to it and it's actually been happening forever?
It's been a continuous battle. I think you saw yesterday Ashish Venksankar from Google. He talked about what they're struggling with, at least in the WAN. And it's identical inside the data center, is that they're trying to find solutions that are efficient, that are less expensive, and have high performance. And it's a traditional thing like, here's the three things, pick two, but they don't have that luxury. So they've been trying to find improvements in datacom connectivity for the last decade, and it's a constant struggle.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because there's the type of computing that we're doing is going to be changing soon as well with machine learning and AI. It's like the more workloads and the more, bits of data that require, that kind of analysis or that kind of interaction. That's just it's definitely different than storing and saving. It's more
machine learning in particular is very challenging, and that's been a newer application that's emerged in the last 5 years. And if you think about a neural net, it's all about connections, and those connections are what are moving from electrical to being optical, and that's a major opportunity for vendors here.
Yeah, as I was going to ask how that's panning out in the market in terms of numbers and in terms of technology direction. Like, what are the technologies that are kind of just out of reach or coming to market soon in that space?
Well, specifically for machine learning, it's been done primarily with electrical interconnections. And so you have companies like Inphi and Marvell that have supplied all of the PAM4 chips. And people typically associate those with client optics, that are coming out of the front panel of a switch or a router. But many of those chips are employed in machine learning applications for interconnect between the matrices. But that is starting to move over to using optics, and that's also an opportunity why people are looking at things like co-packaged optics.
Right, yeah, and the co-packaged optics is, is that sort of a half step between all electrical and all optical connectivity? What
you're trying to do is in a traditional switch, you have the plugs that are sitting in the front, so you've disaggregated the optics from the switching function. By building the optics directly into the switch itself, you eliminate that electrical connection and the power that's necessary to drive the electrons between the faceplate and the switch. So there's a lot of power savings, but obviously there's a lot of trade-offs in terms of complexity when you do something like that.
What's the switching to the telecom market? What's the most have you heard any eye-popping or market-moving announcements at the show?
No. So this OFC typically has at least one big blockbuster announcement, and I can't say that there is one this year, probably because people didn't want to do the months of planning in advance of something like that, because nobody knew if OFC is going to happen. And you've been walking around here. I mean, this place is great.
It's very big. Yeah. All the companies seem to be here, and even though the floor isn't jam-packed with people, the trade show floor has a lot more going on than I would have expected. Yeah. There's just the square footage alone is way more than I thought. So yeah, it's interesting, because this is, I would say this is probably seen as a very successful show. This edition of it, and a lot of people seem to be enthusiastic at meetings, just getting back out there and that sort of thing.
Well, one metric, I was responsible for organizing all of the Market Watch and the Service Provider Summit programming, and a big fear leading up to today was that a lot of the speakers wouldn't show up, and
Right.
I would say at least 4 out of 5 people showed up. So I mean, we're almost back to normal in terms of having people here. On the telecom side, though, there hasn't been any big blockbuster announcements, but what we are starting to see is there's been many people looking at the coherent pluggable market, 400ZR, and there's a lot of announcements around different derivatives of 400ZR that, in essence, break the standard in order to get more performance. And so, Acacia made announcements, NeoPhotonics made announcements. I'm sure I'm forgetting other ones off the top of my head, but there's a number of different companies who are finding ways to add their own secret sauce and build a product that gets better performance if you're willing to part from the standard. And so that's been really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting, because that's service providers that have to make a choice then, or the equipment vendors, whoever's packaging it all together needs to make a choice between, do I go with something more interoperable so I can, benefit from a variety of competitors, or do I take what's on the table now and try to get that first mover advantage?
Yeah, and what's funny is it's companies, there doesn't seem to be a pattern in terms of what they've decided to do. Like Ashish yesterday from Google talked about how they're only going to use 400ZR, and they're really trying to not use any of these non-proprietary approaches, which kind of surprising. Like they own their own network.
They kind of do everything else themselves.
Yeah, and then you look at some of the more traditional operators, and they see the performance and the money that they can save by replacing traditional transponders with pluggables, and they're going all in with proprietary approaches. So there's no real pattern among these types of operators have taken this approach, and it really tends to be more of a function of the culture of the organization.
Yeah, that is interesting. Is there anything that seems to stand out to you as a trend to watch, as we go through the rest of the year? I mean, depending on what part of fiber optics and optical networking you're talking about, obviously there's going to be more fiber to the home and fiber to the business, sort of happening. That seems to be showing up in the forecast and everything else. Supply chain issues be damned.
Yeah.
But do you see anything else we should be on the lookout for?
I think the thing that is really going to be worth watching this year is the ramp of pluggable coherent. There's tons of suppliers, there's tons of demand. Right now it's supply limited. There's lots of people who are trying to build special things, taking risks, there's a lot of innovation taking place. And so that's a very exciting place. With a horizon out to OFC next year, I think you're going to see people talking about doubling the speeds, doubling the performance. And so we're really just at the beginning of a major new trend in terms of using pluggables as a way to do long distance coherent communication in volume. Yeah. So that's the key trend to watch this year when I think about everything that's happening.
And that makes building out optical networks what's the limitation on pluggables in terms of being able to, what part of the optical network are they good for, and which ones are they not so good for?
The performance tends to be less than the super duper Apollo level rocket type of go and just build the most awesome thing you can.
Right.
But in exchange for that, you get something that's higher volume, not necessarily vendor specific. So it's being used in more of the less challenging applications, like in the metro. And what a lot of these new derivatives are allowing operators to do is start to drive through their traditional ROADM networks. And so instead of what a lot of operators are now beginning to evaluate is, do we need to buy standalone optical hardware anymore, or can I just take these pluggable coherent optics and just put them directly in my router and eliminate that layer?
Yeah, that's definitely a big question for operators, and an interesting one, because a few market moves have happened to make that easier. Cisco's bought into optics and is developing its own, and I think Infinera is also trying to build.
Yeah, Infinera is now, they announced at the show that they're just getting ready to sample mid-year their own pluggables, and again, they have their own special approach with XR. So again, it's all along the theme of, everyone's standardized 400ZR, and that's awesome, but people are still trying to find ways to make it even better at the expense of interoperability. And it comes down to whether an operator is comfortable with that trade-off.
Excellent. Well, maybe we'll see some bigger announcements ramping up to OFC this time next year.
Definitely, yeah.
Hey, Andrew Schmitt, thanks so much for taking the time, and it's good to see you in person.
Hey, it's great to be here. It's great to see everybody here, and it's nice that everyone's back.